Lori Cantrell, a proud member of the League of Women Voters of Sioux City, and I will be serving as moderator for this evening's Iowa Senate and House candidate forums. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization whose membership is open to all citizens over the age of 16, male or female. We do not endorse candidates or political parties. We do, however, educate ourselves and work to educate the public on issues affecting our citizens and the government. That is why we are committed to hosting candidate forums like this one. Tonight, the League of Women Voters of Sioux City will be assisted by the Sioux City Mayor's Youth Commission. The Mayor's Youth Commission represents the Sioux City public and private high schools. The member students are committed to community service. The Mayor's Youth Commission also mentors the young ambassadors from area middle schools. The League of Women Voters of Sioux City is proud to continue our work with the Mayor's Youth Commission and to involve them in this and our other forums and events. Tonight, the members participating will be Grace Hodge and Isla Nelson. They will be keeping time, so you need to watch them for your time signals. And also Sophia Nelson, who is one of our youth ambassadors, will be collecting audience questions. So Sophia, you want to wave to everybody so they know who you are? We would like to thank Western Iowa Tech Community College for the use of their facilities for tonight's forum. In addition, thank you to Chris Mansfield and the mass media students in making the excellent arrangements for tonight's forum. Tonight's forum will stream on WIT TV YouTube, the League of Women Voters Sioux City Facebook page, and the KCAU website, SiouxLandProud.com. The Facebook page will be monitored for any questions coming in for the candidates. I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters of Sioux City Planning Committee members for their assistance and hard work in organizing this event. Thank you very much for making all the arrangements. Our panelists tonight are, representing the League of Women Voters, Linda Santee, representing KWIT, Mary Hartnett, from KCAU, evening anchor Sophie Erber, who came straight from one camera to the other, so thank you very much for being here. And a Witt Community College mass communication student, Pablo Gutierrez. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you said it right.
Okay. On behalf of the citizens of Sioux City, I want to thank our candidates for their willingness to run for public office and remind everyone, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. At this time, I would like to introduce our candidates. All the candidates in contested races were invited to participate. So we invited for the State Senate District 1 race, Jackie Smith, Democrat, and Rocky DeWitt, Republican. Mr. DeWitt declined to attend. And for the State House District 2 race, Bob Henderson, Republican, and Steve Hansen, Democrat, and Bob Henderson declined to attend. There are also 3 uncontested races in the area. For State Senate District 7, Kevin Alonz, Republican. For House District 1, J.D. Schulten, Democrat. And for House District 14, Jacob Bosman, Republican. In a few minutes, I will pose a question to each candidate relative to their qualifications for this position, and then we'll allow them 60 seconds to respond. The panelists will then pose their questions. Both candidates will answer the same question, and then I will call on the next panelist to pose a question for the candidates. The candidates will each have, I think we can bump it up to 90 seconds to respond. After half an hour or so, we will switch over. We'll take a brief pause, and then we'll switch over to asking audience questions. So if you have questions in the audience, you're encouraged to write them down on a card and pass them in, and then I will post the questions when we get to that portion. We will also be taking questions that come in over Facebook. And at the end of that, we will allow the candidates to give closing statements. Everybody ready? Okay. All right, I will now pose our introductory. Before we start, I would like to remind everybody in the audience, please silence your cell phones, and we would ask that you demonstrate respectful listening behavior so that our audience can hear all the responses. I will now pose our introductory question and ask each of you to respond within the 60 seconds time limit. Please state your qualifications for serving in either the Iowa Senate or the Iowa House of Representatives. And what is your motivation for running for office? Do you want to go ahead and start, Jackie?
Sure.
Okay.
Is my mic on? Yes?
I think so.
All right. I'm proud to be a lifelong resident of Sioux City. I raised my family here. I had a 34-year career in speech pathology. I worked in education, worked in both rural and urban schools. I also was a county supervisor for 8 years. I say this at the door, and I think they say you're old, but I have a lot of experience that I've been able to bring. And during all that time, my husband and I also bought a franchise, a clothing franchise. So we entered the world of small business. Tried that for about 10 years, learned about profit and loss statement and inventory turns, and that we would be the ones working on weekends. So retail kind of changed, and we left that business. And shortly after that, I decided to take a run for supervisor. So I think I'm qualified because I have a good real-world experience. My feedback at the door is that I offer a common sense viewpoint, and people just want their senators, their representatives, really to legislate from the middle, and that's what I think I do, try to listen to both sides.
Thank you. And Mr. Hansen.
Thank you. Also want to thank everybody for being here tonight and on campus. So it's always a pleasure to come back on the Western Iowa Tech campus. So I've been the director of the Sioux City Public Museum for the last 21 years, and before that, well, all of a sudden it seems a long time ago, I was in the Iowa House for 8 years and the Iowa Senate for 8 years. Left the legislature to take over the museum, and the goal was to raise enough funds to find a new facility for the museum, and we did that. And then before that, I was director of the Woodbury County Juvenile Detention Center for 7 years. And one of the things that got me to run the first time around, when I was at juvenile detention, I was interested in mental health issues, juvenile justice issues, and criminal justice overall. Got into the legislature, as I said, got out. The more I was out, the more I realized we were going backwards. Iowa is number one in the country in education. We don't say that anymore, and there's a reason why we don't. We started going backwards on our environmental policies. REAP legislation, which I had voted for, we're going backwards. So I got involved. There's always a lot to be done, but so got in for 2 years. I would like to run for one more term. I think there's a lot to do. We need to still be competitive. We need to get back to fully funding our public schools, cleaning up our waterways, taking care of our citizens, and making Iowa a good place to work in and retire in.
Thank you. And we'll now move to our panelist questions. Ms. Hartnett, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. There's been a lot of talk about the big tax cut last year at the State House. Republicans cut taxes quite a bit. Some of those have not gone into effect yet. I just wondered what each of you think Democrats could do to bring more tax relief to low-income and working Iowans. I know there's been concern about a lot of the tax cut benefits going to corporations and wealthy Iowans. So,
Mr. Hansen, do you want to start?
I actually voted for that bill. And one of the reasons in 40 years of public service that we hear over here is what can we do to be more competitive with South Dakota? And also the refrain of how do we keep our retirees from moving just across the river to South Dakota, moving to Florida, somewhere where there is an income tax. So a significant part of that tax plan was to eliminate the tax on retirement income. That benefits a lot of people, whether it's IPERS people, union people with their pensions, you name it, farm income. So that was very significant. We also passed a tax cut on moving mental health costs from the county burden, county property tax, over to the state. So that's significant. One could easily argue that tax cuts went to an upper bracket. One of the amendments I offered at the time in the House was to flip those brackets and offer the relief to the lower and middle income first instead of having it the other way around. That amendment got defeated, so that's unfortunate. I think going back to the mental health portion of that, how significant that is, and one of the reasons I want to run again, is the state has a history of not fulfilling its obligations. in any number of ways. Right now, you're going to hear from the city council about backfill and how the state's not living up their obligation. Well, the same thing could happen on this mental health. So everybody has to be vigilant, make sure the state says that what they committed to, and the legislators have to commit themselves to that too.
Ms. Smith?
I support tax cuts that benefit the middle class. I voted against this tax bill because I thought 4% across the board would take too much out of our budget. Now, tomorrow, the revenue estimating conference will happen. We will have a better idea of what kind of income and revenue they'll be predicting for the next few years. So the jury's out on exactly the impact of the tax bill. Something that I was proud of as a Democrat, and something that I think that supports lower income people, were our tax savings on diapers, adult diapers, children's diapers, feminine hygiene products. I mean, those were things that we passed this year. It was bipartisan support, and it does target the very people that need it the most. I offered an amendment that was not taken during the tax floor debate that would have placed a 4% tax cut for 98% of the population. I felt the top 2% seem to be doing just fine at the current tax rate. And I know that we're going to have some holes in our budget, and we have a lot of one-time money right now. So I was just a little leery of doing across-the-board tax cut. But I do think we did have to do a tax cut. And really, by code, we had to give some back because we collected too much. So I wasn't opposed to a tax cut. It's just, if I were the leader, I would have made it more targeted.
Thank you. And we'll go on to the next question. Ms. Santee?
Thanks, Corey. So for each of you, what are your top 3 concerns to address in the 2023 legislative session?
Well, I'll start with education. As I knock the doors, as I talk to the constituents, as I view families and the way they function in our community, I know that a good K through 12, even a robust, not even good, robust K through 12 system, followed by opportunities at community colleges, four-year colleges, trade schools. We need to prepare the next set of people are going to have jobs, and make sure that the jobs pay enough. The second concern, that the jobs pay enough to raise a family. Iowa has a workforce shortage problem, and maybe that's my third one, and it's going to I'll dovetail into that. And I've been hearing some misinformation at the doors. Iowa has a low unemployment rate, less than 3%. So the big workforce solution this year was to pass an unemployment bill because we were going to get those people back to work. Well, the thing is, people are working. The majority of people are working. It's less than 3%. Iowa is the fifth, let me see if I say this right, has the most people working. We're rated number 5 in having the most of our population at work. So it isn't that we're not working. It's that we need more people in Iowa. There are not as many here. So when we look at legislation and policies, and I know my time is up, we have to make sure that Iowa's a welcoming place where our young folks want to stay, because they're leaving, and I want them back.
Mr. Hansen?
Great. I also, number one priority is education at all levels. We've been seriously underfunding public education, not just K through 12, but our community colleges and also our regents. I referenced in opening comments about Governor Branstad, Governor Ray, Governor Vilsack, all pronounced Iowa to be number 1 in education, because we were. Last 10 years, we have backslid dramatically, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but part of that is that because we're underfunding public education. And then what we saw, and it's been very scary actually the last 2 years, is the attack on K-12, on public teachers, librarians. It just makes no sense to me. We need to build up education. Priority number 2 goes back to health care, mental health care, We have to do more than just pay lip service to mental health care. We have to put resources into that. We made a couple of baby steps in that the last couple of years. Long ways to go. At least people are talking about it. And then number 3, Senator Smith referenced workforce. If you address education, you address health care, and you address child care, which we have a shortage of in the state, put that all together in quality of life, you'll get people to come to Iowa. But we have to figure out how to get people to come to Iowa, no question about that.
Thank you. Ms. Erber?
All right, thank you. And of course, I would be remiss without bringing us something very current, right? As someone who works in the news, one of the big stories of the past week, of course, is Tyson, right? Taking their corporate offices away from Dakota Dunes. And, you know, on its surface, Tyson probably looks at it and says, you know, 500 people, that's not that much. But here in a community like Siouxland, and as you address voters here in the area, that means a lot to people who work here. As you mentioned, both of you, good paying jobs to stay here. What would you do legislation-wise to try to incentivize big companies to not just want to come here, but to keep their people here, to stay here? Do you think anything can be done at your level? For either of you, you could start first.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, Tyson's announcement is a gut shot to the whole community. I mean, it impacts not just Dakota Valley schools, but some of the Sioux City schools too. The little things that people don't think about, United Way, maybe symphony subscriptions, right on down the line, museum donors. But, you know, when you look at the business climate in South Dakota, which is highly touted by their governor, you have to ask, okay, why did they make that decision? That was a corporate decision. So I still maintain that if you treat your people right and you foster the whole environment, quality environment, you'll bring people in. And, you know, I think we've made ourselves more business friendly in this state. We know we have a good workforce. So I don't know all the reasons why Tyson moved. That's a corporate big decision. It's unfortunate that the state of South Dakota couldn't reel them back in. And we'll see what happens. You know, our concern here is what's going to happen on the Iowa side. Right. It is Siouxland, but you know, you hate to see any corporation. We've had a few of those leave in Iowa too. So you keep trying to, you know, just march forward and do all the right things and try to recruit.
You know, I agree with a lot of that. First and foremost, my thoughts go out to the families that have to relocate. And then for our community, because these were white-collar, high-paying jobs. Those are hard to come by in Sioux City. But I also think it speaks to a couple other things. We're a tri-state area, so when something happens in Nebraska or South Dakota, it affects those of us here in Iowa. And also, as Representative Hansen mentioned, the tax climate for corporate offices in South Dakota is very lucrative. You know, I could say it's almost the Cayman Islands of hiding some money. So it draws a lot of people with money, and there's benefits to living there. But guess what? It's not enough. It's not enough for a company to keep workers there if it's more prudent for them to move them all to one location. So what we can do is continue to ask ourselves, what are we doing to make this a welcoming state? What does it take for our young people to stay here? What kind of business incentives do we need to keep in place? Which ones do we need to get rid of? Because there are some that need to go too, in order to get business here. But without a workforce, it doesn't matter how much we try to recruit a business, because people are not going to come here if there aren't workers to fill the jobs, or businesses won't come here if there's not workers. So it takes a community effort. I like the idea of a regional economic system where you have stakeholders from maybe the Tri-State Chamber of Commerce and perhaps the center of that, labor at the table as well, because we certainly don't want business to come on the backs of working men and women either.
Thank you. And Mr. Gutierrez?
I guess also bouncing off that, with the job market being so filled, how do students expect to achieve their dream jobs in the job market since it's so full, and how will the legislation step in to possibly help?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that the legislature does things like trying to put more money. There's a fund that Workforce Development Scholarship Fund, I believe is what the name of it is. And only 25% of the students that apply for those grants are able to get them. So the more likely you are to get a grant or a loan, the more likely you are to get an education. If you go to community college, more likely you are to stay in the community in which you got that degree. I went to a small private college, Briar Cliff. I never left either. So I think the small colleges and private colleges function a lot as far as job creators, like a community college does. So we can look at what kind of legislation we can pass to help students not have so much debt. I'm going to go back to, we have to start funding quality of life things like bike trails. You know, I keep saying, and this is what I say to myself, what makes you move to Iowa? What makes, if you don't have family here, what would make you move here? Well, a family looking for a world-class education system and then jobs after the kids graduate. That's why you come to Iowa.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson?
I think we're doing a lot of things right now. Much like Senator Smith, I also went to actually 2 private colleges in Sioux City. I started at Briar Cliff and finished at Morningside. I also had the privilege of being an adjunct instructor at Western Iowa Tech. So all 3 campuses mean a lot to me, and every chance we get to do something down in Des Moines for them, whether it's the scholarships that Jackie's talking about or Iowa tuition grant for both private schools. But we know is, especially with community colleges, Western Iowa Tech's doing a great job looking for the niche markets, working with businesses and filling those. So I think one of the biggest things we can do is keep tuition low. Western Iowa Tech, right now, and this is a sign of getting older, but right now, Western Iowa Tech, the per hour rate is more than what I paid at Morningside as a private school. And that's because of underfunding by the state legislature. When you look at the Regents institutions all raising tuitions, that's because the legislature did not fund them adequately. So they either cut services, cut majors, or they raise tuition, and that's back on all the families. So once again, you know, there's room for everybody, and then we have a great private school system too that we subsidize. We donate over, not donate, but we incent private schools over $100 million a year in Iowa. Over $100 million go to private schools, K-12. So we do a lot for education, but we can still do more. And then it goes back to quality jobs, recruiting business and industry in, but Senator Smith hit it on the nose. People come back to Iowa either to raise their children, or they have family here already, or they come for a job. Gateway was a good example of that when Gateway was in North Sioux. People came from San Diego, from the East Coast, because there were jobs to be had.
Thank you. And we'll go back down to Ms. Hartnett.
Well, speaking of education, last year the whole issue of vouchers for private schools was a big issue. It did not end up being part of the education bill. Some people are talking about it coming up again this year. I just wanted to ask both of you what you think about vouchers. I kind of know what you think, but you know, looking forward, do you think that vouchers do have a chance to pass?
My first?
Sure.
I do think they have a chance to pass, depending on what happens in these midterms. I do know that the governor inserted herself in Republican primaries and supported candidates that were in favor of vouchers, removing the more moderate Republicans that still believe that the greatest path was funding public education, the greatest path for improvement in Iowa and success. So, yes, I think there's real threat. Yes.
And Mr. Hanson?
Yeah, well, obviously the threat is real. Senator Smith left off. It passed the Senate. And why it died in the House, so there were quite a few rural Republicans that saw how that the governor's bill was going to hurt their community schools, their small schools. I think over 75% of the counties would not be helped by the bill that the governor proposed. But it's also a false argument that to do this plan, you have to take it from public monies. You don't have to do that. We have a $2 billion budget surplus, $2 billion. And you're trying to take it away from public schools? I don't get it, and I still don't get it. And the people that the governor went on and beat in her own party, they didn't get it either, obviously. They saw that that was not a good idea. So very real shot at that. There's other ways of doing it. I already said we already contribute over $100 million to private schools, whether it's AEA funding, transportation, food costs, books, right on down the line. One of the most lucrative tax credits we have in this state is a tuition tax credit that if you donate $1,000, let's say to ABC private school, you get a 75% tax credit. So your $1,000, you really only do $250. That's pretty amazing. That's literally one of the best tax credits we have in the state. So to pit one system against the other just isn't right, and that's how you divide Iowans, not unite them. So it's a very real bullet. The people that are being supported by the governor and by the Republican Party of Iowa, in all likelihood, they're supporting vouchers. It's the Arizona model. Arizona's shown us it doesn't work well. It's not right for Iowa.
Thank you. And Ms. Santee?
Thanks. So for both of you, how will you work to earn voters' trust? How do you work now to earn the trust of the voters in your respective districts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you'd like to think that's a common sense question until you look around nationally and everything else. I've knocked on thousands of doors in every neighborhood in my district, whether it's Riverside, Leeds, Greenville, every neighborhood. And you go out and talk to people, and the easy answer is you just tell them the truth. You never have to worry about it if you tell the truth, right? That's an old saying. And then you go down and work, and you try to work for your district. It doesn't always work out that way. X amount of time, somebody's going to be upset with you, but you try to do what's right for the community, and you do go out. You don't need to take a high-priced poll to figure out what the people are talking. You go door to door, and they'll tell you, and they'll also tell you how you're doing. As you know, the league has regular forums during session. Been doing that for decades. People will tell you, why did you do this? Why aren't you doing that? So I think you just tell the truth. I am just stunned. And you see at the national level how people just out and out lie anymore, and somehow they're excused for that. I'm not going to name names, but you got U.S. senators out there. And then you look at campaign commercials that are going on when the commercials are just, they're not even misrepresentations, they're just outright lies. And why we accept that, I don't know, how we've devolved to that. So, my pledge is I stick with my issues and stay with that, work my butt off, and, just keep myself responsible to the people that I serve.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
I believe coming to forums like this is a big part of being a senator and being accessible to the voters. Going door to door, I have been a firm believer for years. I ran for county supervisor, actually. My mother had me out walking for other candidates when I was very young. So I learned at home the value of going into neighborhoods. And I want to back up a little bit. We went through COVID. We had kind of a strange first term. My first term was not at all normal in the Senate because the world was upside down for a while. So when I started knocking doors in May, I thought, I wonder what I'm going to find. I hope my policies, what I've been working for, are still a good match for the district. And quite honestly, I just didn't know. So I started off by doing wellness checks. I just honestly felt that way. I was knocking on doors saying, I just hope everybody's okay. And it's evolved into very specific conversations about how they're struggling with rising prices, how they're working 2 and 3 jobs. Someone talked to me about window tint. And I think the value in this is that you can become effective in the minority party, because we are members of a minority party because it's all Republican. But I can take those stories and then I can offer an amendment. I can work bipartisan on some legislation, and I don't know those things if I don't talk to the people. You have business groups that are great at lobbying. All the groups are very good about finding you in Des Moines and telling you about their legislative objectives.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop so that we can get some more questions in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm very passionate about voter contact.
Ms. Erber.
Thank you. Another hot topic, of course, it's been in headlines, and as you said, members of the minority party in the state, you might be on the certain side of this debate, but the abortion debate. Everybody talking about, especially we're in a unique situation here in the tri-state area because different states have different laws. Here in Iowa, what would you say to voters on your stance on abortion and reproductive health? Especially, we are on a community college campus. This is a population of people who might be even more vocal about the issue.
I would say that that is a decision that belongs between a doctor and a woman and her doctor. Listen, when the Dobbs decision came down, which is when Roe versus Wade was overturned, women lost rights, a constitutional right to an abortion that we have had for 50 years. 50 years. So I say, why are we going backwards? There are exceptions to every situation, and to take that away is wrong. It scares me to think that my opponent would be weighing in on that decision that is the most difficult time for a woman. This is something that can affect families as well. If a pregnancy goes wrong, it becomes a family issue, and politicians just need to stay the heck out of it.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson?
Thank you. One thing I've learned going door to door, and this goes way back when I first started, is that it isn't really as partisan of an issue as it's made out to be. I mean, it becomes nationally, politically, it's good fodder for both sides, but the reality is you go door to door and you get both men and women, they'll tell you what they feel privately. And it is that, it's private. They don't have to go out and report it on the media or shout it out to their neighbors, but they will confide in you. I was on 27th Street on Saturday, and a mother said to me, asked me what my position was. I told her. And then she told me about her daughter, who her daughter's life would be very much at risk because of her health conditions. If she got pregnant and had it, the daughter would probably die. So, I mean, why? I mean, that should not be my decision. It shouldn't be a retired 70-year-old math teacher's position or some guy down in Oskaloosa. It's the woman's decision, period. And I thought Roe Wade was a good, steadying influence for the country for 50 years, and now it's starting to divide people again. And it just really shouldn't. I mean, I know from my standpoint, if it's my family, my wife, my sister, my sister's daughter, if it came down to the life of one of them versus the unknown, I'm going to take my wife or my sister or my sister's daughter. So, yeah, it just should be a private issue.
We would like to remind the audience to please remain silent during this. Thank you. If you have a question, put it on a card and we'll try and get it in later. All right, let's move on to our next question.
What actions are being taken for underrepresented groups, such as those with disabilities, and to access for higher education?
Well, I think ADA, which has been in effect for a while, has made a real big difference. And some schools and universities are still adapting to that and learning different parts. And ADA evolves also. So I think there's more scholarship assistance out there than ever, and for targeted sectors. So and we have a ways to go. But I think maybe one of the biggest things that we can see, the population in Iowa is kind of stagnating at that younger age level. So as the kids start getting up to seniors in high school, there's a smaller pool, so all the schools are recruiting them. So more schools have to offer more enticements, more incentives. So I think that's going to be a positive thing too. Hopefully we don't lose too many schools, but so I think there's a lot that is going out there. There's more that we can do, and it basically comes back to allocating resources.
Voc Rehab does work with students post-secondary and also in starting, I believe, in middle school to transitioning students with disabilities into either further education or the job, or into a job. So that is a resource. It doesn't get a whole lot of new funding every year. It seems to be pretty stagnant, like most of the state budgets are pretty status quo these days. Also, I think colleges have gone out of their way, some more than others, to be welcoming, to offer some different learning styles, to offer more one-on-one assistance, because they realize that maybe learning different or a disability doesn't mean less intelligence. It just means a different way to learn, and that many of those folks go out and become very successful adults. My son was one of them, did come through Western Iowa Tech and ended up being able to get a college education. So you have to have a combination of will on the part of the student and opportunities on the part of the college, and a little funding to go with it. So.
Thank you. I think we're going to do one more round of questions from our panelists, and then we're going to move to audience questions. So if you have any questions, please get them to Sophia so that we can get to those quickly. So Ms. Hartnett, do you want to ask a final question?
Yeah. How about legalizing marijuana in Iowa? I know a lot of Democrats I've talked to have said they think it's a good idea, maybe even some Republicans, although there's some hesitation there. What do you guys think?
I think it's pretty expensive to criminalize, try to arrest people, throw them in jail. There's disparity. If you're 7 times, if you are, let's say you have 2 people both smoking some marijuana. One is white, one is of color. The one of color 7 times more likely to be arrested and put into jail. So factors like that, and the fact that there's going to be a lot of tax dollars going into South Dakota if they actually get it legalized. I would like to see Iowa regulate it like they do alcohol. Popularity of legalizing marijuana has increased across the population, and it doesn't seem to be as taboo. And if we set it up right, maybe we would get some young people to come back and be entrepreneurs. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's opportunities, and I know we have a lot of need in this state, and I see the opportunities with it. The police, on the other hand, aren't necessarily in sync with this. So we would have some, to have to put a task force together and do it very deliberately and as carefully as we could. But I'm in favor of legalizing, regulating.
You. Mr. Hansen.
I think the first step is at least trying to expand medical cannabis use. It's really pretty ridiculous, the kind of restrictions Iowa has put on medical cannabis. There are people out there that can truly benefit from that, whether it's glaucoma patients, cancer, whatever it might be. Once again, it should be between the patient and their doctor. There's all kinds of medicines out there, certainly hemp, marijuana, and certainly medical. It's interesting. I mentioned the woman before on 27th Street, down the street and across. I'm not going to give the address, but the guy said kind of the same question. If I want to smoke a bowl when I get home from a hard night's work, should I be put in jail for that? And the answer is no. That's what I told him. So, we have models out there right now, state of Colorado, out on the West Coast. People are doing it. They've had some pros. They've had some cons. So I think Iowa probably, if it goes that way, it'd be an incremental approach. But my first step is trying to expand medical cannabis and then going from there.
And Ms. Santee.
Okay, y'all, what's your position on a constitutional amendment to codify restoration of voter rights for felons, for those who have been felons?
Support.
Yeah, I mean, the governor did make a good step on restoring felon rights. It's still a little murky, and a lot of people out there don't quite understand the process. We need to make that more clear. And then you also, I mean, when you say a felon, it's a wide range, but my own personal belief is if you've done the time, if you've gone in there and you've done everything you're supposed to do, and as a state and as a community, if you believe in the rehabilitative nature of man, then when that person gets out, They did their time. They ought to be able to come back in the community, and they ought to have rights just like everybody else. They did their time. They paid their penance. So that's an area we ought to work on.
Thank you.
Did you want to add anything, Ms. Smith?
Nope, I said I agree with it. Just short and sweet. I'm trying to be better because I was too long on other ones.
Gave
Ms.
back some time.
Erber, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Corey. So a lot of my viewers are your voters, right? And
Hope so.
I hope so. Some of the feedback that I receive that I wonder if you guys do too, and what your response would be to it, is that the nature of campaign ads has become so volatile. And as you alluded to earlier, I think both of you mentioned briefly just the nature of it. That, you know, one side says it's an outright lie, and it's just going back and forth. Do you think that the nature of ads affects voter turnout? Because at the end of the day, you need voters to turn out, right? So
Right.
what would you say to voters about the nature of campaign ads?
Well, you know, I say with less than 30 days now, we're kind of entering the silly season. And sometimes I wonder, like with my opponent, if he thinks he's running for school board, if he's running for Congress, because when you see the ads that somehow I have this like close connection with Joe Biden and I control national inflation and national gas taxes, like you're running for the wrong one, you know. So it gets a little laughable, but it is also, it's not good for anything. It is leading to voter suppression. People do get turned off. The reason you run negative ads like those is because negative ads have a tendency to work. So what you do is, as a candidate, you have to buy time to rebut those, because if you don't rebut, then it becomes the truth. But some of the stuff is just so crazy out there. I mean, 2 years ago, there was an ad my same opponent ran that said Steve Hansen wants to give China a pass. And it's like, I had no idea what that meant. I have nothing to do with China. So people would kind of give me a good hard time about it, so they kind of laughed with me, but I still don't get what that means. And I asked him once, and he really didn't have the answer. But what's happening, though, look who pays for the ads. I mean, look at the end of every ad, there's supposed to be a disclaimer who pays for it. And oftentimes those are by state party, or I know there's some mailers out there by an out-of-state group, dark money. So if I'm a person, I'm going to see where did this come from, and then you as a consumer, you have to judge how much truth is in that. By the closer you get to the election, people are turning off all of them. It's like a pox on both your houses.
Well, I'm not really a fan, even though we're running them. You know, politics has changed. Campaigning has changed from just from 2008 till now. It does seem much more divisive. We run ads basically just to kind of get our name out there. I still believe the best effective way, we run it to be competitive. But for me, you win an election by going to the doors, by talking to the voters, by making sure that your policies are broad enough and cover enough people that you're helping families get to the next step, because most people just, want a little bit left at the end of the day. They want a decent job, and they want their kids to do a little better than they did. So I just listen to those stories. I go back. I try to make policy with that, and I think that's what's important during a campaign. The rest just seems to come with it, and it's also has to do with campaign finance reform too. Honestly, if I get another job, which I'm not going to get another job after this, I would be fighting for campaign finance reform, because I am disgusted by the amount of money that it takes to run these elections and how much time is taken away from voter contact to raise money to run those ads.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for our final panelist question.
So there's been an increase in threats and acts of violence in schools K through 12 and even higher education institutions. How will the legislature ensure a safer environment so that both students and teachers can focus on education?
Am I first? It's a pretty good question, and it's a timely one, because I know even when I go to the Senate, I don't always feel safe, because guns are allowed in the Senate. We sit down in our chambers. There's balconies up above, and you don't know at any given time you know, who is there, what they have on their hip, in their sock, wherever. So just the anxiety around the amount of guns is what people are talking about at the doors. They're talking about wanting to feel safe. So it's a timely question. I'll tell you what I don't think. I don't think we should be arming kindergarten teachers with guns to keep schools safe. We expanded some use of money. We made it a little more flexible. Schools can hire school resource officers out, especially in rural Iowa. Sioux City already has school resource officers. They can certainly provide a level of, security, I guess. Doors are locked now. What we see in schools is a symptom of what we see in society. They're just little societies in there, and so whatever we're seeing outside tends to show up in schools and colleges. So I don't know what you do necessarily on a college campus. There's response drills. I know my little grandson had an active shooter training in second grade. He didn't sleep for 1 week afterwards. He was so anxious. So I don't know the answer to all that. I can just recognize it and want to work across the aisle. This is a bipartisan issue. That's not a Democrat. That's not a Republican. That's a bipartisan issue.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson?
I think Senator Smith mentioned it's a bipartisan issue. I don't know if it's necessarily a bipartisan solution, but one of the things that we do is start by recognizing we have a serious mental health issue out there. And not every shooter, not every murder is necessarily due to mentally ill, although I would argue you have to wonder if they're not. Something's wrong with them. But every time there's a senseless act, there's mental health. Okay, I accept that. Let's do something about it. Let's start funding the necessary mental health resources that we need out there. Let's get the beds. Right now, our jails are the #1 mental health facilities in Iowa. It shouldn't be that way. Our county jails, our state prisons, we should be housing people somewhere else. But I agree with Jackie. I mean, I'm really not in favor of arming all of our teachers. I want teachers to be able to teach in safety. I want police officers to give them the resources to do their jobs, just like anybody else. I manage people, give them the resources, and give them enough of them. And maybe we lessen some of that, but I still believe mental health is at the crux of it, and we have to be more aggressive in helping people.
Thank you. That concludes our panelist portion of the evening. Thank you all very much for being here. Again, Linda Santi, Mary Hartnett, Sophie Erber, and Pablo Gutierrez. Thank you all for being here and participating. And if there are any audience questions, they will bring those up to me. And I will ask as many of them as time can allow. Think we can keep answers to 60 seconds to get through questions faster? No.
Can they get that closer so I can see it? It's dark over there. It's hard to see those.
Well, we were trying to keep them out of the line of the camera, so I don't know that we can really move them up.
I'll try harder.
Thank you, Sophie. Okay, first question. What is your view on the Public Measure #1 gun amendment, which is up for a vote on November 8th?
I'm not going to vote for it based on just information I've been given. We already have Second Amendment rights. They're guaranteed. This really isn't it. It reads like a Second Amendment, just a Second Amendment right type of constitutional amendment, but according to my legal friends, it's going to open up a lot of probably courts having, to make rulings on every gun law, the constitutionality of all gun laws, and it should, it may make it easier just to have unfettered use of guns.
Mr. Hanson?
Well, we have a Second Amendment, and people feel very strongly about the Second Amendment. Some people feel like it's the most important amendment. I happen to think the First Amendment is. But I would encourage everybody to turn the ballot over and read it carefully. It does go beyond the U.S. Constitution. It is a stricter level and handcuffs legislators. What I have heard from law enforcement people, much I did when we did away with the permit to carry, law enforcement's very concerned about there. And you go with strict scrutiny at a different level, it becomes problematical out in the field for many of the officers too. So it's kind of a complicated issue, and it's kind of tough to explain. So please, just whatever side you're on, to take a good look at it. But we already have the Second Amendment. That's my answer with you. And we have a whole lot of other amendments. Do you go to strict scrutiny on every amendment then? I say no.
Okay. Not enough child care continues to be a concern in our community. These topics have been discussed by both parties. However, funding streams like Early Childhood Iowa funds continue to be reduced year after year. What bipartisan solutions can you introduce to assist providers and promote new ones? Mr. Hansen, I think this is one of your key issues.
It is. We actually did some bipartisan things the last 2 years as far as funding. One of the crucial things we could do is offer raised tax credits and do it income-based. I think that would be very helpful. A couple of things that were Band-Aids that we did in legislature that I did not favor was raising the number of children that would be under the care of teenagers. I have a problem with that. So I think we could also incent the business place, encourage them, offer businesses tax incentives to maybe have child care on site, or I believe Western Iowa Tech has a child care element on campus here, those kind of things. I mean, a lot of the savvy corporations and businesses are doing that because they know that gets them better employees and more dedicated employees. Those are just a few of the things you can do.
We don't pay daycare workers enough. It's hard, the workforce shortage in daycare workers too. So if we could look at ways of reimbursing and funding early education at higher levels, we could pay the workers more money, and there wouldn't be the shortages. Increasing class sizes of 2 and 3-year-olds is the wrong approach. I mean, just think one more 2-year-old. And you already have 6, and you're going to get another one. It's a big jump. So businesses also had some business credits this year. We legislated some of that. There was some money to help them out, and then President Biden distributed funds to Iowa, recovery funds, and a lot of those went to like before and after school programs and daycare centers. So some short-term relief there. It is a long-term problem, and families are making decisions on how many kids to have based on their child care costs, and that's wrong.
Okay. This is a question from Facebook. It says, I don't know if you can answer this, but why do you think your opponents declined to attend this evening?
It's a family forum here, right? So, no, it's I can't speak for them. I'm disappointed that they aren't here because League of Women Voters, as I mentioned, for decades, you've had forums that have been good for democracy, good for the community. We have very few chances to debate head to head. To me, a forum like this is a job interview. And to me, you don't get the job if you don't go through the job interview. So I think they're cheating their constituents, and quite frankly, they're just cheating democracy. So it's not just a local deal. It appears to be a statewide method. So I just find it very disappointing.
Would you like to add anything?
It saddens me. I have always looked forward to these forums, and I'm always pretty nervous about having to come too. But I do think you owe it to your voters to be able to state your views, to be able to answer questions, for them to be able to hear, to make a good choice. I don't know why my opponent did not come, but it is a big part, like I said, of being a senator, showing up. 4 years ago, I flipped my seat, and part of the reason I think I did it is because my opponent had the worst attendance record in the Senate. So right off the bat, I have an opponent that doesn't even show up for a forum, the only forum. So it makes me wonder, will he show up for his job? And I don't know. He'll just have to answer for that.
Okay, and this next question goes back to the question of abortion, and I'm trying to parse this. So the question is, do you support abortion for full-term babies as the Democrats' platform allows? I believe this is asking about late-term abortions,
Yeah.
whether that is something that should be included.
Yeah, that's quite the loaded question, but
Yes.
the answer is no.
Okay.
And quite frankly, I don't know of anybody that has done that. And the Democrats that I hang around don't say, yeah, we're for that. We're talking about women's right to choose reproductive freedom and not denying them critical health care decisions at any level. So are there exceptions under what's being proposed? No. So, but once again, I get the partisanship and going to the extreme, saying up until the last day possible, 9 months into it. Does anybody know that? I don't. And I certainly would not advocate that. So I just, it's muddying the waters. It goes back to the woman's right to choose.
Listen, if anybody is considering it a late-term abortion, something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. That would be the only case that would even be considered by a physician, for one thing, for a physician. Is going to have a say-so in that as well as the woman. So that is a loaded question, and it's a scare tactic. It's something that resonates with a certain base, and actually, it's the wrong question to ask. There's other better questions.
Okay. Do you support President Biden's plan to change the word sex in Title IX to sexual orientation?
I don't have an opinion on that. I don't really know about that issue.
Mr. Hanson?
Actually, it's the first I've heard of it, so I'll have to take a look at it.
Okay. I think that they're referring to, recently we had the bill that passed last year that prohibited trans students from participating in sports of the gender they identified with as opposed to the gender that they were assigned at birth. Do you have an opinion on that question?
Well, I have a vote on that, and I voted against what I felt was a very hateful bill. Less than 2% of kids would identify as trans, so it's not a problem. The Iowa School Athletic Association was handling it through their rules. There was not a problem in Iowa. And to hear parents who came to the Capitol and talked in subcommittee meeting about the struggles that their kids were going through, and they were real, they're not making it up, and how devastating this legislation was really to a very small percentage of people is wrong. The only threat that I think we have to women's sports is the lack of funding. If we would fund it like men's sports, then it wouldn't be so threatened.
And Mr. Hanson?
I think part of the flaw in the bill that was in the legislature was that you were telling organizations like the NCAA, the NAIA, Iowa High School Athletic Associations, what they should do when all of them are working on it already. And then you were also telling private colleges like Morningside and Briar Cliff, you can't do this. And quite frankly, more and more, the state legislators are trying to dictate everything out there. The party that used to be against big government has become the party of big government and telling everybody what to do. It's what a stunning turnaround. So I had people at Morningside tell me you may be threatening future NAIA tournaments in Sioux City because of this. NCAA, we've seen the sanctions. Let the governing bodies that know what they're doing The Utah governor, Republican, vetoed a similar bill and basically said, why don't you let the people that know what they're doing and have the science work on this before a bunch of part-time legislators work on it, and basically making an emotional decision. So, once again, it makes for good commercials, but you just need to try to take emotion out of it and bring some science into it.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you both for attending and give you each an opportunity to make a closing statement. 60 seconds. Mr. Hanson, do you want to go first?
Sure. For as challenging as the last 2 years have been in the legislature, whether it was COVID and everything else, it's still rewarding. I still enjoy going out, meeting with people, talking with people, and trying to work out situations. I think if you look at the record, you'll see I'm one of the more bipartisan legislators in the House. My record will show that. Show me a good idea, I'll take a look at it. I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican idea. I'm going to vote for it. If it's a bad idea, if it doesn't do well for Siouxland, for Sioux City, I'm probably not going to go with it. So I'm looking forward to one more term. There's a lot to be done. It goes back to my issues: education, fully funding K-12, all the public institutions, community colleges. Healthcare is essential out there to make it more affordable, more accessible. Mental health is part of that. We have to pay more attention to mental health. And then we have to pay, and we haven't talked much about the environment. Drinking water is becoming a serious issue in the state. We have to address it before it is the problem, before you're in Mississippi.
And Ms. Smith.
I want to thank you, first off, to the League for hosting this, and to our panelists, and to Mayor's Youth Commission for not getting after me for not paying attention to the time cards. That wasn't on you. You guys did a great job. I want your vote. I'm here to ask for that tonight, to state my case that I have worked hard. I have not missed a vote. I have perfect attendance in the Senate in my last 4 years. I'm at your doors. I think I know what you want. I think you need good jobs. I think we need more support for entrepreneurs. I've run into some young folks that are artsy, and they're making goes of photography and art, and there's a vibrancy in Sioux City. And so I think of it two ways. I want to spread the message, and I want our fair share to come back of state dollars. If you are west of Des Moines, and I think my colleague would agree with this, sometimes you're forgotten in the state of Iowa. So we work very hard, and actually we do work in a bipartisan manner for things that help Sioux City. We work on tax credits for businesses to be more competitive with South Dakota, and we come together when we can. I want young people here. I want a thriving, welcoming Iowa, where you can raise a family. It's pretty simple. And I think Democrats offer the correct policies for that. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Sioux City, I want to thank our audience for attending in person or watching online tonight's forum. We also wish to thank Steve Warnstad and Chris Mansfield of Western Iowa Tech Community College for their assistance. Special thanks to all the students in the mass media program for their great work. Above all, we wish to thank our candidates for their cooperation and commitment to public service. Please give them a round of applause. I would like to remind you that the upcoming election is Tuesday, November 8th. You know what? I think that's wrong because it says 2021. Yeah, but the year's wrong. With the polls open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. A listing of your precinct is available from the County Commissioner of Elections at the Woodbury County website or on the Woodbury County Courthouse Room 103. I believe Pat Gill has left, but I believe that he also is mailing that out to everyone so that you can find your correct precincts because of redistricting. There are two other methods to cast your ballot. You may fill out an absentee ballot request form available in the entry area and mail it in to our Woodbury County Commissioner of Elections, who then will send you a ballot to complete and return by mail. You may also opt to vote early by casting an absentee ballot in person at the auditor's office at the Woodbury County Courthouse, room 103 during regular business hours, or at Longlines Family Rec Center beginning October 19th from 8 a.m. to 4:30. All absentee ballots need to be received by the auditor's office by the time the poll closes on November 8th. If you have questions, call the Woodbury County Commissioner of Elections at 712-279-6465. Anyone 17 years old may register to vote in the first election after they turn 18. We have voter registration forms at the entry table. You may register to vote at your precinct on Election Day, provided you bring an acceptable ID, driver's license or photo ID that is current, valid, and contains an expiration date and has your current address. Should you wish to learn more about the League of Women Voters of Sioux City membership and our focus on nonpartisan and voter member education on issues facing our nation, state, and city, please stop at the table as you leave for membership information or email us at lwvsiouxcity@gmail.com. I will point out that I did exactly this when I attended the first candidate forum after I moved to Sioux City. So do remember to follow us on Facebook. Thank you again for your participation this evening, and remember to vote in this and every election. Your vote is a precious gift. Use it wisely on November 8th. This concludes our candidate forum for the Iowa State and Iowa House races.